is going to be another true crime case. I almost said a solved true crime case then, but it's not actually solved. You might have noticed that the thumbnail said solved ? And that is because it's technically not solved. Although police believe they know who is responsible for this crime, no one's actually faced any prison time, no one's actually been found guilty of this. So today we're going to be talking about the Charlene Downes case, which is once again a very, very requested case from you guys. So before I get into it, I just want to give my usual disclaimer that I mean absolutely no disrespect to anyone that I talk about in this video. This is all just information that I have found on the internet and I'm compiling into one video. So Charlene Downes was a 14-year-old girl born on March 25th, 1989 in the West Midlands in England. In 1999, when Charlene was 10 years old, her family decided to move from the West Midlands to Blackpool in Lancashire. There she lived with her parents Karen and Robert and her 3 siblings, 2 sisters and a brother. Charlene was a very happy, very outgoing, very normal girl. I honestly couldn't find too much on like what Charlene was like as a person. She was quite mischievous, she was quite rebellious, she'd been expelled from school before just for misbehaving, as a lot of kids do in school. But other than that, I don't know much more about Charlene as a person, so I'm just going to kind of skip forward to her disappearance at age 14. So Charlene woke up on Saturday, November 1st, 2003, and her day began just as any other weekend did. She had a bath, she had breakfast, she put on her favourite video on TV of her favourite performer, Darren Day. She used to watch him all the time while she was getting ready, while she was getting dressed, doing her hair and everything, and then she went over to a friend's house. While she was at this friend's house, the 2 of them had gone out for a walk or whatever, and they met up with another one of Charlene's friends, who Charlene made plans with later on in the day. So anyway, Charlene returned home around midday, and she told her mother that she was actually going back out again at around tea time with her sister Becky, and that they were going to be leaving at about 5:30. And her mother Karen said yeah, that's fine. She was going out at 5 o'clock that night anyway for work. She actually handed out leaflets and posted leaflets for the local takeaway. So the lot of them went out, Charlene's mother went out and the 2 sisters went out, and then they eventually saw each other out on the street. It was around 6:45 p.m. Charlene and Becky noticed their mother on the other side of the road handing out these leaflets, and they ran over to her. They were laughing, skipping. They still had their milkshake cartons in their hands. They'd just been to McDonald's. The 3 of them were talking when Karen asked her daughters what their plans were for the rest of the day. Becky said that she was just going to go straight home after this, whereas Charlene said that she was actually meeting up with some other friends. She was going to wait for her 2 friends, Natalie and Natasha, to get the bus into town, and then she was just going to hang about in town with them for a bit. So Becky went home and Charlene decided to stay with her mother until her friend's bus came in. So Karen said, yep, that's fine, just don't be home too late. Charlene's curfew was 10 p.m. and she agreed to it. She stood and waited with her mum for a while until the bus eventually came in. Natalie and Natasha got off and Charlene ran straight over to them. She was so excited. The 3 of them then ran back over to Karen just to talk to her for a little bit. Karen reminded Charlene of her curfew at 10 p.m. not to be in any later, and once again, Charlene agreed. Charlene gave her mum a big kiss and a cuddle before running off into town to spend some time with her friends, and that was the last time that Karen ever saw her daughter. Karen returned home from work that night at 10 p.m. expecting to see Charlene home. However, she was greeted at the front door by her husband Robert, who said that Charlene still wasn't home. The 2 of them didn't panic too much at first. Like I said, Charlene was known to be quite rebellious, and she did sometimes stay out later, which is why her mum reminded her so many times. They knew what she was like, so they just tried not to panic too much, and they stayed up waiting for her to come home for hours, but she still wasn't home. They were ringing her phone, but she wasn't answering at all, and so her father Robert decided to get on his bike and ride down into town along all the piers and things, just to see if Charlene and her friends were still out there. But around half an hour later, Robert returned and said there was absolutely no sign of Charlene out in the town. None of her friends were out there either. Apparently, Robert was a lot more calm and level-headed in this situation, and he was just reassuring Karen that she'd probably stayed over at a friend's house and forgot to tell them or something. And as I've been saying, Charlene was quite rebellious, so it wasn't out of the realm of possibility that that could be true, that she was just staying with her friends and not telling her parents. And so they just kind of calmed themselves down and went to bed and expected to see her the next morning. So the next morning, the 2 of them woke up and Charlene still wasn't home, so they waited around for a few hours hoping that she was just going to come home from her friends, they were going to tell her off and everything was going to be fine. But Karen says that she had a gut feeling at this point, after waiting for Charlene for a couple of hours, that she probably wasn't coming home. So Karen and Robert got in the car and they drove around all of Charlene's friends' houses, checking at every single one to see if she'd slept over, to see if she'd been there the whole time. But she wasn't at any of her friends' houses. And Natalie and Natasha, the girls that she'd met off of the bus, they actually said that they'd left her on the pier alone at 9:30 so that they could go back and babysit. And then they didn't know what she did after that. So now Karen realised that her gut feeling was right. Something must be wrong if she's not with any of her friends, none of the family, and so she contacted police. But when she contacted police and told them that her 14-year-old child had been missing for almost 24 hours, they told her that she had to wait a further 24 hours to be able to report her missing. By Sunday evening, it had been 24 hours since anyone had last seen Charlene, and there was still no sign of her. She wasn't home, still wasn't answering her phone. On the Monday morning, Charlene's parents hung around the house for a while. They were looking out of the windows constantly, waiting for her to walk back home, but she just wasn't coming. By midday, it had been around 40 hours since anyone had last seen Charlene, and so Robert and Karen decided to go to the police again. Finally, police came round to the house and filed a missing persons report for Charlene Downes. They took a picture, they took a description, and then they began door-to-door inquiries. But then Monday rolled into Tuesday and there was still no sign of Charlene, and by then, by Tuesday, her mother knew that this was very serious. At the time, Charlene had actually been expelled from school for bad behaviour, and she was due back in on the Tuesday for her introduction back to school. And despite her bad behaviour, she really enjoyed school. She liked the kind of social aspect of it, and she was excited to be back. She was excited for a fresh start. So when she didn't turn up on the Tuesday for her return to school, her mother knew that there must be something wrong, because she was really looking forward to that. Eventually, days turned into weeks and there was no sign of Charlene Downes. None of her property was found, no texts, no calls, nothing. And as the story began to make its way to local news, police began receiving a lot of sightings, possible sightings of Charlene. Someone said they'd seen her sleeping rough alone on the side of the street. Another person said they'd seen her on a train going somewhere. One person even called police to say that they'd seen 14-year-old Charlene Downes laying dead on a railway track. And police looked into every single one of these leads and found that none of them were actually Charlene.
Somebody said, bought me a bunch of flowers saying, we've seen your daughter dead. I said, just get away from me, just go. Sent them away from the door. Just horrible people saying things.
As police often do with missing children's investigations, they look into the family as well, because it's relatively common for it to be an inside family thing. So they began searching the house, questioning family, friends, all of that, yet nothing was coming up. And still, after a few weeks into the investigation, Karen noticed that none of the newspapers, national or local, were running Charlene's story. None of them were showing her face, her description, anything about her disappearance. So Karen actually got in contact with the Gazette and asked them to run this story about her 14-year-old missing daughter, and they said that they would. They said that they actually knew about this story beforehand and apologised for not running it sooner, because police had actually told them that this was a runaway case. Well, police had never told Karen that. Police had never told Charlene's family that they thought that Charlene had run away. Police had got in contact with all of these newspapers and things, telling them not to run the story because they assumed that she'd run away. When that wasn't confirmed, there was no evidence to say that she had run away. So they were limiting the exposure of this case, not letting newspapers run her face or her name or anything like that, because they assumed she'd run away without any evidence. Imagine how many witnesses could have possibly come forward had they seen Charlene's face in a newspaper within the first few days, within the first week. But at this point, it had been about 3 or 4 weeks since Charlene was last seen, and so running her face then might not jog the same people's memories as it would have had it been printed before then. So after that point, Charlene's face was on every newspaper, it was on every news channel, and sightings continued to come into police, and police would look into every single one of them, and none of them were Charlene. Quickly, months turned into years without Charlene, with no explanation of where she was, what had happened to her, or where she'd gone that night. And the next real development in the case didn't come until 3 years later, when police called and asked for Charlene's family to come in for a meeting.
They sat us down and he said, I've got you down here. He said, I've got some news, terrible news for you. I said, what news? He gave us a brew. I'll never forget it. I was drinking a cup of coffee at the time. He said, we believe Charlene's been murdered. I literally dropped the hot coffee into my lap. Went, what? Murdered? What do you mean murdered? Where is she? Where's her body? Where is she? If she's been murdered, where is she? Why have you not told me? I literally dropped my coffee into my lap. And I didn't even, it was scalding hot and I didn't even feel it. You know what I mean? And he said, we're 99.9% certain that she's been murdered. They said,
that's actually his words.
99.9%. Yeah, they were his words. I will never forget those words as long as I live. And he said, we're actually going today to arrest the people concerned. They were going out that morning to arrest them.
So with that, the Charlene Downes case turned from a missing persons investigation to a murder inquiry. And just as Karen said, 2 arrests were made that day. The first of these arrests was 29-year-old Ayad Al-Batiki, the owner of a local takeaway named Funny Boys, and he was arrested on suspicion of Charlene's murder. The second arrest was his business partner, Mohammed Raveshi, who was charged with disposing a body. So police told Charlene's family that they'd arrested these 2 men, but they didn't tell them why they'd arrested them, like what led them to arrest them, what they think that those 2 men did to Charlene. It wasn't until about a week or so later when Charlene's family actually found out what police's theory was into Charlene's murder, and they didn't find out from police themselves. Charlene's father Robert's sister, so her auntie, actually called the family crying one day after she'd bought the paper and Charlene's story was in it. The police had gone to the media and given the media their theory on this case, what they think these men did, before they told Charlene's actual family.
And she said, I need to tell you something. And he said, whatever's the matter? She said, are you sitting down? She said, have you got the Metro? I went, no. She said, have you read what's in it? Charlene's body has been cut up into kebabs. Well, I tell you what, I went, what?
So
what?
The police had told the press that before they told you?
Yeah. They'd let that leak to the press before I even knew about that.
It was theorised that the men had killed Charlene and then disposed of her body by cutting it up, cooking it and selling it as kebab meat out of the takeaway. So the trial began in May of 2007 and the police's main piece of evidence as to why they even had this theory in the first place was revealed. It was a secret tape, an audio recording of the men talking about what they'd done to Charlene. Police actually managed to get these tape recordings because the person that had tipped police off about these 2 men was actually one of their brothers. This man went and told police that he'd heard his brother and his brother's business partner bragging about how they killed and disposed of a little girl's body. And so police decided to bug their homes, their cars, their work, everything to see if they could get the 2 men talking about the situation. Allegedly, in these tape recordings, Ayad Al-Batiki admits to having sex with Charlene and then killing her and then feeding her body through the meat grinder and then selling her on as kebab meat. In another recording, he also said, I killed her, I killed a girl, I was just angry. And Mohammed is also heard on these tapes saying there is nothing left of her. She was here, she died, there really is nothing. Although this whole time, none of the men said Charlene's name or anything, so it's just kind of speculated that they could have been talking about Charlene. Another massive piece of evidence in this trial actually came out of the questioning of over 3,000 people in the Blackpool area, and it was revealed that there was actually a very serious grooming and child exploitation ring being run in the local takeaways, including the one that the 2 men owned. Local takeaway owners and workers were known to be grooming and exploiting in the region of 60 young girls ranging in age from 11 to 15. They'd give these little girls free food from the takeaway, free alcohol, free cigarettes, free drugs in return for sexual favours, and somehow police and locals outside of this ring had no idea that it was going on. And it turned out that Charlene Downes was one of these 60 girls that was being groomed and exploited, and she'd actually been a part of it for a whole year before her disappearance. So these 2 pieces of evidence, the tapes and the grooming ring, seem very solid, like they could be used to find these men guilty of Charlene's murder. But at the same time, they had no body, they had no proof that Charlene was even dead. Eventually, the court case came to a hung jury, meaning that the jury couldn't make a unanimous decision whether to find these men guilty or not guilty. Half of the jury thought that there was enough evidence presented in trial to lock these men up for life and say that they killed Charlene Downes. However, the other half believed that there was nowhere near enough evidence to prove that these men even knew Charlene. So no verdict was made and both men were just released back into society. But it actually emerged after the trial that one of the jury members actually knew one of the two men on trial, which is, of course, against the rules. It also emerged that one of the defendant's brothers had been following around different members of the jury, trying to intimidate them, staring at them, following them places, probably in an attempt to scare them into finding his brother not guilty, and all of that together probably affected how this jury came to such a decision. So because of these two reasons, a retrial was ordered for April of the following year, where they were going to do it all again and hopefully have less bias. However, the retrial fell through when the prosecution found flaws in those audio tapes. I believe the flaws in the audio tapes were that the person that transcribed them, the person that listened to them and then typed out the transcript, had actually done it wrong. But I'm not 100% sure on that. No sources definitively said that that was the reason, but a lot of them kind of hinted towards that. But for whatever reason, these tapes couldn't be used in trial, and they were the only thing that pointed towards these two men being guilty. There was no other evidence to say that it was them. And without that evidence, the men couldn't be retrialed. Both men were actually given £250,000 each in compensation for false arrest for the whole thing, for having to go through trial without sufficient evidence. Around a week after the retrial, Charlene's mother Karen was actually arrested for stabbing her husband Robert during an argument, although he refused to press charges because he understood that she was going through a lot of pain at the moment and she didn't mean to take her anger out on him. Charlene's family are actually a part of the EDL, which stands for the English Defence League, and it is a huge far-right party in the UK that stands for British values. They believe that people in Britain's human rights are being threatened by Muslim extremists, and they want to end political correctness. In a survey of EDL members, Muslims in Britain came up as their third biggest concern for the country. And while the EDL insist that they're not racist, they're often seen that way, saying that a whole religion of people in the UK is a cause for concern. Charlene's family and their EDL member friends have protested several times to get Ayad and Mohammed, two Muslim men, retrialed. However, Charlene's family believe that the two men are actually being protected by police.
They watch them, don't they? If we have a protest, they're protecting them. We can't say what we want, we can't shout what we want, we can't do what we want. You know what I mean? It's as good as they're as good as tuck them up in bed at night. You know what I mean? It's just wrong. They've got the protection of the police. They have the protection of the police. Everywhere he goes, the police protect him. Every time he does anything else.
But none of the group's attempts to retrial these men have been successful, and although they are believed to have been responsible for Charlene's murder, they've never successfully been prosecuted.
Well, obviously, I'd like the defendants to face trial for what they've done. I'd like them locked up for what they've done. I don't think they deserve to be walking around. I don't think they deserve to be on this earth, but perhaps I'm out of all wrong saying that, but that's the way I feel. I think it should be a life for a life. If I had my way, I'd bring capital punishment. That if I could, I can't, but if I could, I would. I believe that they should both be publicly hung for what they've done. To me, prison's too good for them. To me, prison's far too good. It's too easy. It's too soft an option.
Ayad al-Batiki has been in trouble with police several times since the trial for different assaults, different sexual assaults, and every single time he seems to have just gotten off with them. A year after the failed retrial in March of 2009, Charlene's sister Emma was charged with racially aggravated assault against a brother of one of the two men that was believed to have done this to Charlene. And then in 2012, Charlene's brother was arrested for assaulting the man that was charged with disposing her body. That same year, Karen was given a warning by police for handing out leaflets implicating Ayad and Mohammed in the murder of her daughter. And then in November of 2013, 10 years after Charlene's disappearance, it was actually revealed that Charlene was being sexually abused in her own home. The family had been known to social services for all of Charlene's life, and Charlene herself was actually categorised as vulnerable to sexual exploitation when she was just 11 years old. When Charlene was 11 years old, a hospital report identified signs of sexual abuse, and so she was forwarded to social services. And when social services got involved, they found that the house was being regularly visited by men with rape and assault convictions. And at the time of Charlene's disappearance, there was a man staying in the household who was on bail for sexual offences, although he isn't believed to have any part in Charlene's disappearance. So the last development in the case happened in 2017 when 51-year-old Nigel Lloyd was arrested on suspicion of involvement. Nigel lived in Preston at the time of his arrest, but at the time of Charlene's disappearance, he was living and working in Blackpool. Nigel actually owned a business in Blackpool. He owned a little cafe, and so police found it very suspicious that around the same time of Charlene's disappearance, he just abandoned his business and moved to a different city. Police held and questioned Nigel for 48 hours, although after that they had to let him go because they didn't have any promising evidence to say that he was involved, so who knows if he did actually have a part in it. Around that same time, so 14 years after Charlene Downes was last seen, police found CCTV of her last movements, and these tapes had been in archives all this time. This footage shows Charlene and her sister Becky just walking together on the day of her disappearance, which is ultimately kind of useless to police. But police didn't know that these tapes were going to be useless to the investigation. They didn't know what was on them. So these tapes that they'd been holding for 14 years could have had Charlene's killer on them for all they knew, and they just hadn't bothered to look. But not only that, had these tapes been found and released to the public at the time of Charlene's disappearance, it could have brought forward so many more witnesses that actually had evidence to lead to a conviction. Witnesses do often need their memory refreshing, so if these tapes were released and someone recognised, say, Charlene's hoodie, they could have remembered seeing her later on that day. But now it's too late to kind of refresh people's memories 14 years on. No one's gonna recognise a jumper like that and remember seeing it 2 hours later. But yeah, right now no one has been found guilty of Charlene's disappearance or her murder. The investigation is still ongoing, but it is very slow. And that completes this case. Do you think it's pretty much solved, or do you think it has to be someone else, since there's no physical evidence at all? The only kind of evidence that I can see for those two men particularly is those tapes, and those could have easily been jokes. A lot of people do have a wicked sense of humour. So what do you think? Do you think that those men are guilty? Do you think there's a lot of kind of circumstantial evidence, like the grooming ring and stuff like that, to point towards them? Or do you think it must have been someone else? Or do you think Charlene ran away? But yeah, that completes this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, make sure you leave a big thumbs up on the video because that really helps me out. Subscribe down below if you want to see some more from me. I make videos like this all the time. A big thank you to my channel members. All of the names are on screen right now. If you want to become a channel member, you can click the link in the description, or you can click the join button underneath this video. If you become a channel member, you'll get your name on this snazzy little end card. You will get more say in the videos that you see on my channel. I do polls and ask for suggestions all the time. So if you want to request a case, or if you want to request anything in particular on my channel, then you can become a member and get those requests fast tracked. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!